so much for coming today. Where to begin? The problem with writing some remarks about Dad wasn't coming up with enough to say, it was deciding how to limit what to say. My initial draft speech was more than twice this long, so I had to cut way back. There were too many words. Maybe I should start by telling you all that Dad wasn't perfect. He wasn't very patient, although he liked to think he was. Nothing ever went fast enough. As a result, he'd frequently get banged up or cut himself or turn his ankle, and he'd come to the house needing bandages or iodine or some other form of first aid. And my mother used to tell him he should be more careful, but that would just make him mad, so she stopped. Instead, she'd tell me, "The world's most patient man isn't very patient today," and we'd laugh. Dad didn't spend much time alone with me when I was little. He was always working, so Mom and I did our own thing. But on the rare occasions that he would take me with him, usually to places like the feed mill or the sale barn, I could tell that people seemed to think he was something special, although I was too young to grasp just why that was. When I got to high school, he and I began to have more of a rapport because he took on the job of proofreading my papers, and I wrote a lot of papers. In a time before computers and spell check and online thesauruses, he'd sit at the kitchen table with a big dictionary next to him and carefully go over my work, look up any words that he questioned and suggest edits. Dad gave me a lifetime of practical advice. I had driver's ed in school, but he had some of the best driving tips. When I was a senior in high school and planning to drive to downtown Chicago alone for the first time, I said I was kind of nervous about driving in a place with all those lanes of traffic. He said, "That's no problem. If you've got a car in front of you and one behind and one on either side, that's all you really have to worry about at one time." I think of that often when I'm in heavy traffic. He had a lot of other witty sayings, such as, "Always buy quality, you'll never be disappointed," and "There's no shame in saying you can't afford something." After I bought my house, he became my handyman. He was a jack of all trades and pretty good at most of them. Plumbing was an exception. There were some mishaps with plumbing. But he could cut down trees, put in fencing, rewire lamps, and move and install heavy appliances. He enjoyed odd jobs and would often ask, "Do you have anything for me to do at the house?" Sometimes he'd bring his friends Bob Buell or Ken Beacon along. They were all jokers, and when I came home, in addition to finding the job done, I'd usually find they'd left a funny note or moved things around in some silly way. One night I had to call Dad at 10 o'clock to tell him that there was a bat in my house. He said, "The hell there is. Do you want me to come up and remove it?" I said yes. I was afraid that it might bite my cats. Actually, I wanted it removed because I was afraid of it, but I didn't want to admit that. He arrived 50 minutes later wearing his suede bedroom slippers. He hadn't taken time to put his shoes back on. He put on a pair of gloves, and within a couple of minutes, he'd caught the bat and taken it outside and released it. When he left, he told me I should call any time, day or night, and he'd come right up in his Batmobile. Rudy was a lifelong scholar. Although his formal education ended in the spring of 1940 when he finished 8th grade at Rat Hollow School, he was one of the most intelligent people I've ever known. He got a GED when he was in his 40s just for the fun of seeing if he could pass the tests. He was interested in virtually every subject. He was always reading, and he could recall details of what he'd read many years later. He could tell you the latitude and longitude of places all over the globe and recite details of Socrates' death. He knew the lengths of rivers and the depths of oceans and the average rainfall of places you've never heard of. Before the internet, he served as a neighborhood-ready reference. He had several sets of encyclopedias and a lot of reference books. People were always asking him questions in person or on the phone, and if he didn't know the answer off the top of his head, he'd look it up. In later years, he did research on his computer and his iPhone. You couldn't be around him for very long and not learn something new. After mentioning an obscure fact, he'd often say, "That comes in handy in my line of work." He and I had many conversations that would have struck most people as very strange. He told me once that if you wanted to dispose of a body, you should throw it into a pig pen because the pigs would eat everything. They might play with the head for a while, but eventually they'd eat that too. When Dad was in his 60s, he told me you should never argue with a man with a gun, but if an attacker only had a knife or some other such implement, he'd take him on. He said, "If I could get a good grip on an arm or a leg, I could break it." He wasn't bragging, just stating a fact. Dad had a long-standing interest in astronomy, and in the early 1970s, he bought his first telescope and a couple of books. His ability to find objects in the night sky was hit or miss at first, but he kept at it and he became more proficient. At some point, a local 4-H club invited him to come to a meeting and speak on astronomy. He agreed, but privately he was a little hesitant because he wasn't a public speaker. He confided to his friend Ken Beacon that he was suffering from stage fright. Ken said, "I don't know why you could whip any kid in the place." His talk was a success, and after that he had a steady stream of speaking engagements. He carried a notebook with him where he'd have people who looked through the telescope sign in and leave comments. Over the years, he showed the night sky to hundreds of people. To the end of his life, he never lost his excitement at seeing the rings of Saturn. Page changer. Rudy was the most disciplined and focused person I've ever known. If he made up his mind to do something, he saw it through. By far, the best example of what his hard work and laser-like focus could accomplish was his recovery from gas gangrene. In April of 1978, Dad was badly injured in a farm accident when his coattail got caught in a rotating shaft on the side of a manure spreader. His right arm was pulled into the shaft elbow first. He spent 6 weeks in the burn unit at St. Mary's Hospital in Milwaukee being treated in a hyperbaric chamber. A story about him ended up on the front page of the Milwaukee Sentinel. In it, Dad reported using his left hand to write a letter to Bob Buell that began, "I haven't lost my fighting spirit, but it sure got the hell kicked out of it." When Dad came home, he devoted virtually every waking hour to recovery. I would often work with him. Months after the injury, he was lying on the living room floor with his arms stretched out behind him, holding a broom handle. The goal was to put both arms flat on the floor. He told me to push on the broom handle to straighten his arms. I pushed, but the broom was still airborne. Gritting his teeth, Dad asked, "How far off the floor is it now?" I said, "About 5 inches. He said, "Push harder, the son of a bitch has got to go." Less than 2 years after the accident, he returned to St. Mary's Hospital and made good on a promise he'd made by walking up and down the halls on his hands. He used to say that compared to gas gangrene, every other physical ailment was just a pit stop. And on the anniversary of the accident every year, including this one, he'd call the people who'd helped him, the neighbors who stopped and freed him from the spreader, and the members of the rescue squad, and thank them for saving his life. Rudy had a terrific sense of humor. It's hard to remember him in any setting without thinking of him laughing or making jokes about something. He liked witty comedy, Monty Python, especially the Ministry of Silly Walks and The Life of Brian, the Marx Brothers. He enjoyed sharp political commentary and could quote Mark Twain, Will Rogers, and Mike Royko. He could parrot Victor Borge's inflationary language, and for 60 years, he and Bob Buell would joke about the strudel eating contest that took place in old Vienna every May the 2nd. He loved to travel. The dairy farmer is tied down because cows have to be milked morning and night. As soon as he retired, he hit the road and was always on the go. It never took him long to decide to go someplace. About 9 years ago, I had been researching a trip for the two of us, but hadn't settled on a destination. One night I saw that Iberia Airlines was having a sale on flights to Greece, so I called Dad up and said, "Hi, person," that's what I always called him. "Do you want to go to Greece?" His immediate response, "Let's go." When I mentioned the upcoming trip to an older man who knew us, he said, "Does your father want to go that far?" I said my father would go to the moon tomorrow if they'd let him. Dad was always looking ahead. When people would complain about how things just weren't the way they used to be, he'd say, "That's a good thing. You can have those good old days." He'd also say, "I wouldn't go back a day. I've been there." He embraced technology. He got his first computer at age 70, his first iPhone at 80. He loved playing chess on the computer. He had faith in the younger generation and faith in humanity in general. Rudy was broad-minded and egalitarian. As the son of immigrants who couldn't speak English before he started first grade, and as someone who grew up poor and didn't have a college degree, he was comfortable with people from all walks of life. He took lighter lessons with a UW professor who went on to win the Nobel Prize in physics. He counted among his friends judges and physicians, pastors and farmers, and everyone in between. He treated them all the same. His heroes were thinkers like Plato and Aristotle, scientists like Newton, Galileo, Darwin, and Hawking, inventors like Da Vinci, Edison, and Howard Hughes. He was a feminist before the word was in general use. He always spoke of his mother with the highest praise. He always treated my mother as an equal. He said if he needed a hired man, he'd hire one, but he hadn't married her to get unpaid help. He was always supportive of me in whatever I aspired to do. He often said, "There should be more women in high places. They're the ones who get things done." Dad was generous with his knowledge and his time. People had not always been so generous with him. When he was a young man, he'd seen someone bend a spike. more accurately, a 60-penny nail. Dad asked the man if he could get some pointers on how that was done. The man said for $10 he'd explain the technique. Dad said he didn't think so. He went to a hardware store and bought a bag of nails and figured it out on his own. He said he nearly killed himself and had a large puddle of sweat on the floor before he was able to make a dent in the first one, but after a lot of practice he could bend one in 10 seconds. He taught many people how to bend spikes and do many other things, and it would never have occurred to him to demand a fee. During the tug-of-war years, new teams would sometimes come here to the Legion and train with Rudy's boys. When someone expressed surprise that they'd be willing to train their competition, Dad said, "We're happy to teach them everything we know, and then we'll go out and beat them fair and square." There's no doubt Rudy was a role model to many. At his 80th birthday party, one of his former pullers put a note in a card that I think summed up many people's feelings about him. It said, "I'm not sure whether you intended to make such an impact on the lives of so many people, but you really have. You always imparted a true sense of fair play, dedication, honesty, and exemplified a leader who led from the front and not bellowed orders from the rear. No matter how tough the going was, there was always a pat on the back, a joke, a lot of hard work, and a lot of fun." Time does not permit me to thank everyone who made a difference in Rudy's life and mine this past year, but I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the entire tug-of-war community. For 50 years, you were his band of brothers and sisters. He loved training with you, he loved coaching, he loved being the anchor man, and for the past 20 years, he loved doing the announcing. He took the job seriously, but he liked to have fun too. Who can forget the immortal words, "This is not a hay rope"? In the 9 months he spent at Woods Crossing, I think there were only 2 days that he didn't have at least one outside visitor, and a huge number of those visits were connected with tug-of-war. He told me repeatedly, "I really don't understand what they see in me, but I guess I must have made an impression on them, and that's not all bad, is it?" For months he looked forward to going to Greeley, Iowa for the pull in mid-June. He told me many times, "I'm going to Greeley. I maybe have no business going, but I'm going," and so he did. Tom Nance and Marty Lavery picked him up in his Pacifica minivan, and they had a great day. Finally, a few words about the obituary. I've written a lot of things in my life, but I think that may be my best received work. I never anticipated the outpouring of good wishes and positive comments it generated. People who didn't know Dad wrote, "I never met this man, but I wish I had." The comments have been priceless. I want to single out a couple of them for special recognition. I first learned the obituary had been posted online when I got a message that said, "You really nailed his obit. I laughed, I cried, I may have peed my pants." and my favorite comment, because it's short and to the point, "I laughed my ass off." I can't think of anything that would make Rudy happier than to know that even in death he's still making people laugh. To use another one of his favorite phrases, he would be just delighted. So thank you again for coming. Thank you for your support over the past year. I hope you continue to remember Rudy fondly and tell his stories. And most of all, whenever and however you remember him, I sincerely hope you continue to laugh your ass off.